reinstated as a minister.
Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, let me concur with the comments made by my colleague Chris Hipkins. This inquiry into the Peter Dunn affair fails on all levels. First of all, it fails because that inquiry showed an absolute inability to distinguish between the role of the executive and the role of the legislature. That inquiry rode roughshod over the right of this House to control its own operations, free from external interference. Parliaments over the ages have fought tooth and nail to prevent that form of interference. It fails because that inquiry sought out information that was confidential and breached the right of parliamentarians to maintain confidentiality about their constituents, confidentiality about their party matters, confidentiality about information that should be kept personal. That inquiry failed to acknowledge the right of members to be told about what was happening, or even the Speaker. Mr Speaker, the inquiry failed on the second level because it failed to respect the role of the media and the role that the media must play as an independent watchdog into ensuring that democratic institutions behave properly. When you start tracking reporters around this building without their knowledge, when you gain access to the data that they are sending and communicating, that is breaching the line between the executive and the role of the Fourth Estate and its right to be independent. So if this inquiry failed, who do we blame? I've been listening to the National Party speakers. They blamed David Henry. Firstly, David Henry. Well, my question is this, Mr Speaker. Who appointed David Henry and who approved the terms of reference under which he operated? The answer to that question is very clear. John Key appointed David Henry. John Key approved the terms of reference that he operated under, and suddenly John Key, as always, is nowhere to be seen when it comes to accepting accountability and responsibility. But Mr Key is responsible for setting up that inquiry and the way in which it operated. And then there was Mr Jeff Thorns. Jeff Thorns was the CEO of the Parliamentary Services Commission, and he was the prime scapegoat in this case. The prime scapegoat. He was sacked despite the fact Jeff Thorns on 3 occasions questioned the appropriateness of seeking that information from members. On 3 occasions. And he was overruled, Mr Speaker. Who overruled him? He was overruled by a man called Wayne Eagleson, who was the Chief of Staff of John Key, the Prime Minister who says, what I want, my Chief of Staff will articulate and you will do his bidding. And I want to recall what Wayne Eagleson sent in an email to Jeff Thorns. He said he confirmed that the Prime Minister wanted the Parliamentary Services Commission to make available to the inquiry team any records and, quote, or relevant material from ministerial officers. No wonder the Chief Executive of the Parliamentary Services Commission handed that material across, material that he had initially resisted giving because he had received an edict from the voice of the Prime Minister through his Chief of Staff, Wayne Eagleson. So it's a bit rich for the National Party members to come into this House and say, this is terrible, Mr Henry, Mr Thorns, how could have they got it so wrong? They got it wrong because they were acting under the instructions or the perceived instructions coming right from the top of the national government, the Prime Minister, and that should not be forgotten. Mr Speaker, this inquiry also failed because it failed to do what it was set up to achieve, and that was to find out who leaked the report. Who leaked the report? Now, I want to make this comment, Mr. Speaker. I'm not a person that's incredibly sympathetic to witch hunts about leaks. I think often a leaker, I think of Edward Snowden, a leaker will be acting because they believe the truth should come out. That's an honourable role for a whistleblower. And Neil Pugmire in New Zealand, who led me to introduce a protected disclosures bill, leaked information that the national government of the day didn't want out, but he felt was important because people dangerous to the safety and well-being of the community were being released from a mental asylum. And he took the punishment for releasing that material. The whistleblower misses out because the government punishes the whistleblower. So generally, I will look at a person's motivation and say they have the right to make known to the public the truth. They have the right to provide information that the public is entitled to get. But in this case, Mr. Speaker, there are no such motives for the leaking of the Kitteridge report. We know who leaked the Kitteridge report. Peter Dunn, Minister of the Crown, leaked the Kitteridge report. And he had no fine, high-blown motive of letting the truth out. In fact, Mr. Dunn should never be a minister in a government again because he broke one of the oaths that we all swear when we become ministers, the oath to maintain the confidentiality of proceedings at the Executive Council. He broke that oath. He has no right to be a minister. That's why he resigned. That's why it is totally improper that John Key should be talking now about bringing Peter Dunn back as a minister. How do we know that Peter Dunn leaked it? Well, we know that there was, over this period, something like 86 emails between Peter Dunn and Andrea Vance. I have never sent more than a couple of emails over the space of a week to anyone, let alone 86 emails over a short period of time. It indicates an obsession. And is there any doubt, really, from any member of this House that Peter Dunn leaked that report? Listen to what John Armstrong said in this morning's paper. This is a quote. You can probably count the number of people who believe Peter Dunn did not leak the Kitteridge report on the fingers of one hand. The same people also believe the moon is made of cheese and you'll find fairies at the bottom of your garden. That's what one of the more experienced columnists said this morning about whether there was any doubt about Peter Dunn's role in it. And what I object to is that when there was a leakage from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the people who there was any suspicion of had to give their evidence on oath. Why did this inquiry not put Peter Dunn on oath so that he had to tell the truth? That was a decision that the government made that would not be a requirement. Double standards, Mr. Speaker, when the people in MFAT who had a genuine cause for concern, a genuine cause to speak out because their ministry, one of the most competent ministries in this government, was being destroyed, they not only had to go on oath, but they faced an inquisition. Everything except the fingernail pulling and the thumb screw. That's what they faced, yet it was softly on Peter Dunn. Actually, John Key didn't want to know that Peter Dunn had done it. He said he accepted him at his word. Yeah, tell that to Richard Worth and to Pansy Wong. What about those double standards? Now, what I am most concerned about, Mr. Speaker, is that we now have a government supported and sustained in office by a former minister who, in his ministerial role, leaked ministerial information. A government supported by a man that faces criminal charges. A government that wants to be supported by a man that believes the Americans never landed on the moon. And by the way, 9/11 was an American conspiracy. This is a shabby, tawdry government that is increasingly desperate to cling on to power by relying on people of those standards and those ethics. Didn't John Key promise us that he would raise the bar on ministerial standards? That has become a joke. This inquiry has failed, and that government is responsible for its failure.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Call on private and local order of the day number 1.
Kaipara District